Hi everybody, I'm Dr. John, work for Blackboard and lead the data science team. And I am going to very much continue in the theme of keeping it geeky and talking about learning from failure. So not too often you get to do the two of those at one time. So one of the things we do, right, with Blackboard is that we have applications that create predictive models around student success. For example, one of the applications that we have, X-ray Learning Analytics, we do predictive modeling based only on LMS data, right? And so we use LMS data alone in order to figure out and predict in advance whether a student is going to be likely to succeed or likely to not succeed in a course. And sometimes you can see here's two charts showing the accuracy of that model. These are students that were classified at high risk of failing. On the left-hand side, you can see the outcomes there. Over weeks of the course, the red students are the ones that actually did fail at the end. We got the prediction right. And then on the right hand, and the ones that are green, we did not. We got it wrong. On the left-hand side is an institution for whom this predictive model worked really well. On the right-hand side is one that it didn't. We have an accuracy rate that's very low. It's like 70%, 65%, a little bit better than tossing a coin, but not something that's good enough to put into production. And we have run into this multiple times. So the question is, and this is after we have data scientists spending a lot of time trying to create a really good model. But at the end of the day, statistics are not magic, right? They only can work with the data that's being generated through the technologies and systems that we used. So we wanted a way to vet the data that was coming through in order to determine the practices and what's necessary in order to create a predictive model before we go off running and applying, trying to create a predictive model. And we've been able to do so successfully. So we'll talk quickly about, because I have 5 minutes to explain complete statistical modeling for meta-predictive models. Not a small feat, right? But by the way, there is a longer report that was just published today that will explain that in more detail. I'm sure Timothy has tweeted it like 5 times by now. If not, I'll do so in a minute. We first selected courses that we thought were eligible to do either modeling or apply the predictive model. You know, there are things like if nobody gets a grade, you probably don't want to include that in your model or your modeling. If you have every single student getting 100%, that's probably not a course that really you need to do predictive modeling on. So, and you can see a number of the other criteria here. Again, that's in the longer form report that you have access to. And then we applied that, and then we took a look at those courses, and we compared institutions for which we could create a really good and accurate predictive model to campuses, one that we could not create a predictive model for and one that we could. So this is a density plot, and just for those of you that don't get to play with density plots every day, what that does is it normalizes differences on the y-axis. So if you've got really different numbers of students, the distribution is something you can look at. So that's a way we look at things to see if they're the same or different. And so here we have the green institution. So this is the relationship, the correlation of clicks per student and final grade. That is, how much the student's use of the LMS, how closely it was tied to their actual final grade in the course. And so you can see here that on the green institution, we've got a range, right? And some that even have a negative relationship. But overall, we've got the peak, and it's a pretty normal distribution, but centered to be about a little over half. Right? So the predictive power is a little bit over half. And then you can see the candidate 1 overlaps that green, right? It overlaps our reference institution, looks pretty similar. And this pinky red institution, I'm colorblind actually, in all seriousness, so I make up my colors sometimes, so bear with me, is very different, right? You can see it's in a different place, right? It does not overlap, it's much lower. So that's one where we said that's an interesting distinction, but we work with multivariate models. We know one thing is not enough, so we also looked at a number of other variables. And here is something that as well, we looked at the relationship between grades and assignment and final grades and other kinds kinds of gradable item types. And here you can see something that's interesting as well. Our reference institution in green, right, has a pretty big spread. Our candidate 1 institution, the one that won the predictive model war, right, actually has a closer and stronger relationship. And candidate 2 has a little bit of a weaker relationship there. We're doing this with a number of other variables, and they help us to come out with a number of practices, looking at those, looking at what matter and don't, that we can recommend. So those recommendations are right here. I'm about to get yanked off the stage, so you can read those really fast, and if you'd like to know more about them and hear them described in more detail, actually I will say a couple things. Using the gradebook frequently and often, the biggest thing you can do to make the LMS have an impact, and then having things that come in early, often, and repeatedly are often very useful to know that stickiness of students. And then really, at the very end, deadlines, no missing assignments. That was a real killer for us with some institutions, that students that didn't submit anything just had missing data, not zeros. So we just forced them into zeros, right? So, and that's something that we would recommend you do. And all of those things are practices, right, that I'm talking about the data exhaust at the very end that need to be integrated into instructional design that's done in a thoughtful way that's pedagogically rich in ways that Leif and other people can speak to you about, and other people. So that's it. Thank you.